Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Shawn and Sus Fantasy Football Show. In this video, we're taking a hot take from each division, and if this scenario comes true, it will break fantasy football as we're currently judging it. So, in this video, we're doing the NFC East, and Sus has selected the Dallas Cowboys. So, why don't you introduce your angle and take, and we'll discuss from there what it would mean for the fantasy football landscape.
All right, everyone. So, for those of you who drafted last year, perhaps you remember a scenario where the community was arguing, is it going to be Ezekiel Elliott at pick 140? Is it going to be Rico Dowdle at pick 120? For the first half of the season, it seemed like there might not be a correct answer to that question. But by the end, it was fairly evident that Rico Dowdle was the guy, and he ended up really consolidating the role for Dallas. And what I wonder for this season is if we get a similar scenario to play out that could break fantasy. What if one of these running backs, Javonte Williams, Jaden Blue, or Miles Sanders, ends up consolidating the workload? So, again, as I said last year, first part of the season, the Cowboys, they have a lot of respect for Ezekiel Elliott. They're giving him every shot in the world to have a role. But at a certain point, it was undeniable that Rico Dowdle was better than him, better than Royce Freeman, better than Dalvin Cook, taking shots on the sideline. Ridiculous scenario. Over his last 6 games, he had games where he rushed for 104 yards, 112, 131, 149 yards. That's Rico Dowdle. Brian Schottenheimer, the new head coach of the Cowboys, he was the offensive coordinator that oversaw that deployment. So it's possible that he could have his fingerprints all over this offense and say, hey, when I like a guy, they're getting 20, 22, 25 carries in games as Rico Dowdle did. And we're looking at a backfield right now that's similarly priced to last season, with maybe more upside in some regards. I mean, we have Javonte Williams, who, albeit he didn't have the best efficiency in Denver, he's personally not the way I like to play this backfield, but it's entirely possible that he gets the shot. Coming over, another year removed from his major knee surgery. He is the most expensive in this backfield, but he has shown a 3-down ability and the type of archetype that could consolidate the role. Jaden Blue, apparently the Cowboys were very high on, rookie coming out of Texas. Very speedy guy, maybe not the full, well-rounded back to consolidate in year one. Maybe more full case would be like an A-chain archetype for him. Miles Sanders is potentially the guy I like to play it through the most at price. A couple years ago in 2022, had over 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns on the Eagles. I get it. It's the Eagles. But, then he went to the Panthers. Wasn't really the best scheme fit. They're kind of just trying to put a round peg in a square hole, or a square peg in a round hole. The pegs and the holes were fitting for Miles Sanders in Carolina. It clearly wasn't the best fit. Now he comes to Dallas, fresh start. It's June. He's already getting reps with the ones. He's also shown a 3-down skill set in the past. Maybe not the best pass catcher, but you don't have to be the most elite pass catcher. Rico Dowdle wasn't the most elite pass catcher, and he ended up consolidating that role. So if you can get that kind of guy, or a Javonte Williams, maybe Jaden Blue surprises us, gets a bigger workload than he got at Texas. If the Cowboys coaches fall in love with them, I think one of these guys, with what Schottenheimer showed he'd like to do, could take in a big role after pick 120. That's a smash.
I can see it. So from what it's, the only thing, the difference that I see is that we didn't know that Rico Dowdle was pretty good before last season. So the process of saying, look, we're going to see what the Cowboys have at running back, and someone's probably pretty good. And as a result, they'll pick one player and then make this guy the featured back, and it's an insane value. Now, I'm a pretty big Rico Dowdle believer as a talent. I'm not as much into these guys necessarily. Now, I will agree with you that between Javonte and Miles Sanders has a more exciting scenario case where he was at the Eagles. It's a really good environment for him. And he goes to Carolina. First year, Carolina's not a very good team. They weren't good last year either, but Chuba came and emerged as this great running back, and he's not a team fit. And they see Jonathan Brooks fall on the board, and then Miles Sanders kind of gets forgotten about. So the one thing now, he hasn't produced in a few years now, but with one team and limited tread on his tires, he does have upside. Now, the one thing that is bullish and is important to think about when thinking about this role is that the Cowboys' offensive line is very set up to block the run. Now, we have to figure out who that is. I see Jaden Blue as more of a receiving back. I could see the narrative where Miles Sanders, if he beats out Javante, maybe Javante's more of a goal line guy. Miles Sanders can get the bulk of the carries and yards and production that we care about and is more of a consistent week to week guy. And Blue handles the receiving work, but we have potentially at least three or four plus run blocking players on this line. They drafted Booker in the first round, who's just a power run blocking prospect at guard. And I could see them also trading for someone, but we can't predict that from that standpoint. But I think the role is live, and I would question really the talent because whoever, if there is a emergent Cowboys running back, that is a huge delta in terms of value. I'm lacking perhaps a little bit of the same degree of confidence in the players that they have now. Now that could change, but that's kind of where I that's kind of in general where I stand. So do you feel the same? Are you very much into Miles Sanders? Is there a Javante Bull case or Jaden Blue could be better? Like, is there anyone in that group that really stands out to you besides just Miles Sanders, or is there?
I think it's the totally reasonable position to have that you have, which is I'm not in love with Miles Sanders or Javante or Jaden Blue entirely, although he's a bit of an unknown from a talent perspective. But I would say one thing I've been kind of viewing a correlation to last year. The Cowboys entirely have a chance to beat this year's Bengals. The way they're set up with a quarterback who has the ability to sling for 5,000 yards, an alpha wide receiver in CeeDee Lamb, a really good wide receiver too in George Pickens. And even in that environment that slings the pill, we end up with a running back that you and I don't think is particularly special talent wise, and Chase Brown consolidating a running back one for fantasy role. If the Bengals hadn't really fallen in love with Chase Brown, he was splitting with Zach Moss, and it was like a couple of RB3s. But by the end of the season, now injury played into it, but the way they treat Chase Brown now, they just kind of fell in love with the guy, even though he's a completely mediocre at best rusher. Great pass catcher, maybe better than anyone on Dallas. But Chase Brown is not a special talent at the running back position, and yet he was able to yield really special results because his quarterback and his two-star receivers put him in a position to score touchdowns, and they kind of just took the pressure off of the running game a bit. I envision a possible similar situation with either Javante or Miles Sanders. Maybe they don't have the pure juice of a Chase Brown, but they don't need to be, if they did, they'd be potentially third round picks next year. I don't think we even need to get that to pay off their price tags of 180, 190, 145 ADPs. If someone could just be half as much of a hit as Chase Brown, they're still paying off their ADP in a handsome way. And I think this Dallas offense is set up to succeed quite a bit when you upgrade from Jalen Tolbert and the ghost of Brandon Cooks to a George Pickens. What that can do for an offense could really work wonders.
I agree with you with the offensive environment. George Pickens is such a good addition for the Cowboys. Dak's going to be healthy. Dak has had the ability to throw for 4,000 or 5,000 yards. A lot of the key also is to just be a guy in a decent system. And I I do see Javante's pretty rough as a talent. His rushing metrics the past couple of years have been bad. He's dealt with injuries. He started out as a pretty good player. I think it's just whether they decide to lean on a guy. I'm in agreement with the role. I think if they traded for a running back tomorrow and this person was a starter, you could put him in that 12, 13, 14 range because you have a good run blocking line, good passing game to move the offense forward where they're going to get high value touches no matter what. It's just whether that are these guys going to be the RB1 by week one because they still have time. I do worry about the talent now. It is tough to pay up for, let's say, a Jaden Blue is more, to me, is more of a a, a third down back as at his price and around like is it late 30s, early 40s, somewhere in running backs. On underdog, I think Javante and Miles are probably equivalent in talent. So that actually does make Miles Sanders a pretty good click based on that knowledge because I don't view them I view them closer to a 50-50 bet for that rushing role. I think Jaden Blue has a pretty solid hold on the passing down role. You don't really draft a guy who's relatively undersized, good receiver, in a lot of fumbling issues in college to handle like heavy between the tackles work. But I guess there is that bull scenario where he emerges as like an H-N type, but I think there are too many mouths to feed in order to get him enough volume relative to the other guys, unless Dak is a super smash and he's this year's Joe Burrow and Chase Brown did a lot of his work in the receiving game as well. So I think there's a lot of juice in the role. I'm just struggling to see like where does one person emerge from that. But if they do trade for someone, then like I will be the first one saying Cowboys running back, Cowboys running back. But that's where I'm struggling with.
So it could emerge in a couple of ways. One, if it's Jaden Blue who ends up emerging, it's just because it would be a scenario where he's competing with two dusty vets and, late November rolls around. And that's when the coaching staff, after a week 10 bye like the Cowboys have, just start to trust the young guy a bit more, put a bit more on their plate. We see that year in and year out with guys like Bucky Irving, who was also not expected to really consolidate a role, but ended up prying it away from Rashad White, who's more of a passing down back. And Bucky even ended up taking on a lot of passing down work, even when he was not considered a good pass blocker or receiver so much coming out. Not that James Blue is going to be Bucky Irving per se. I'm not really projecting that myself, but that would be one scenario. Another is where, Javante and Miles Sanders, who have some injury history of their own, one goes down and the team just kind of trusts the other one rather than bringing in a fresh back off the street. Yeah. They tried that last year with Royce Freeman, Dalvin Cook. It's kind of tough to just mix a guy in midseason sometimes. Some teams just don't want to do that, and they'll ride whoever they have into the ground. So with Javante and Miles Sanders' injury history, just, injuries happen, and the last man standing is kind of the guy. Maybe in that scenario, they don't trust Jaden Blue quite as much because he's a fifth-round rookie. And, this all kind of comes back to none of these guys are like screaming as like talents. And if they were, they'd be going a lot higher. But, last year you got hits like J.K. Dobbins was going at like 190 overall. And we had Kareem Hunt was barely drafted in the entire BBM. So sometimes guys that we can think are a little washed or, not right, coming off an injury can surprise us a little bit if they land in the right spot with the coaching staff that believes in them. I mean, if you had asked me, could Kareem Hunt have a career renaissance last year? I would have said absolutely no shot. He looked entirely cooked. Would be shocked if he signed anywhere. Next thing you know, he's smashing relative to his price on the Chiefs. And so if you get like Miles Sanders hitting like Kareem Hunt did last year, man, you're taking that to the bank.
There's definitely a scenario. Now, at price, I would agree with Miles Sanders. He's at least shown at some point when he was an Eagle, he was pretty efficient as a runner. And it's a great role, great offense, good blocking. So he could, on limited tread, show who he was back as an Eagle. Javante is going to be a really, really hard sell, just the amount of injuries. We haven't seen him be an efficient guy now. If the team really does either see an injury or rally behind one of the guys, I could see that where if they just follow the blocks, like they're pretty good. So I can see that scenario. At least at price, we can have some degree of positivity here. If we see someone like, for example, in Washington, a Brian Robinson who is really a follow the blocks kind of guy. He doesn't have necessarily special juice, and we have a passing down back behind him who's very good in Austin Eckler. And if the Cowboys got late career Austin Eckler out of Jaden Blue, they would feel thrilled with that draft selection in the 5th round. And Brian Robinson's going RB29. These guys are going 40, 59, and it changes. Miles Sanders has been moving up. So if you're watching this and he's at 55, and no, I can read. So I think at price it's worth the risk, at least to have to mix in, because someone has to produce in this role, and they put so much investment in the offensive line, and they're drafting Booker. They wants to run the ball. Now, could they make a trade? But it's hard to project at this point. We're in mid June, so we'll see.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like you said, it's entirely a cost thing for me where this breaks fantasy. I don't think one of these guys is going to have a Chase Brown type finish to the year last year, but if you get a Rico Dowdle type finish out of Miles Sanders, and he hasn't been drafted every draft, so you get some leverage there, and round 18, round 17, a lot of running backs that are just pure zeros. You could be getting like a high end RB2 out of that outcome, which a lot of times your high end RB2s are just volume guys. It's just a position that a lot of the scoring is based on opportunity. And one of these guys is going to get opportunity. So specifically, if it's Miles Sanders, you're getting RB production, man, where a lot of zeros are going. So if you attack wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, call it a day before then, and then you tack on, running back as part of a hero or zero running back build, I think you're getting leverage on some builds that otherwise wouldn't be viable, where you stack up your Josh Allen and your George Kittle and, attacking elite onesie at those positions and get the amount of wide receivers you need. That's how you could really have a lineup that could break fantasy.
Yup, and as a late running back, good offense, good setup, ambiguous backfield. I think that's a really good combination to look for someone who's going to emerge as at least at cost of not have a fantasy breaking type of scenario.
And like you said, I would keep an eye out for a trade. Hard to predict with certainty, but I think it's definitely in the cards potentially. Keep your eye out on a guy like Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker. I think at this point Breece Hall is probably staying, but maybe you can't entirely rule it out.
Still a new staff, so it's possible.
It just seems like a situation that it seems so ripe for a new running back to come in, but they've asked Jerry Jones and the GM and the coach in plenty of interviews now, and they look at, when you ask the Cowboys, are they going to add another running back? They look at you like you have two heads. They're like, why would we need another couple running backs? We have Javonte Williams and we have Miles Sanders. These guys were the man in 2022. And it's like, well, it's 2025 now, but it's a testament to that. There's going to be volume for these guys probably. And for better or for worse, they're going to be riding with these guys, it seems like today.
Yup, I agree with you. There's the upside is there, and you can't just project a trade and say, oh, they're going to trade for someone. We haven't seen enough smoke in that regard. We just kind of think that there are a few backfields with a lot of talented guys, and whether ETN is a very good scenario where it's Tune, it's Tank, it's him, it's potentially LaQuint Allen, and you're like, well, why don't the Jags just get rid of the one they don't like and get a draft pick and put it somewhere else or put it for the future, and let's get the Cowboys a better starter. But I can see it at Price. I would say talking me into Javonte is going to be tough, but Miles Sanders, at least there's a scenario where the Miles Sanders on the Eagles is really the real Miles Sanders, and Carolina just happened to be a nasty sidetrack in his career.
Well, thank you for keeping me honest, man, because, next thing you know, I could get over my skis and have 40% Miles Sanders. Nobody wants that for me. Nobody wants that for anyone. But I would say if you're going to play it anyway through this Dallas backfield, if you want to chase that upside, mix in some Jaden Blue and some Miles Sanders and, go for Javonte if that's your player take and you're into him. I'm personally not clicking him quite as much, but I totally get, from just the volume perspective, if someone thinks that, he could have a renaissance in Dallas, if that's how they want to play it, by all means, there's definitely some type of upside to be gained in this backfield one way or another.
Yup. I think we're in agreement there.
All right, Shawn, thanks for joining me. Everyone, thank you for watching the video. If you could drop a like if you got some value out of it, I appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.